Hi and welcome to another Watch Geek video. Today, we take a look at a couple of vintage Seikos from the 60s. The two watches in question are the Automatic Selfdater made by Suwa Factory and Sportsmatic Calendar made by Daini Factory. These models were among the first automatic movements Seiko made using their own design, and one of them will become the origin of the first Automatic Grand Seiko. Both watches are very classical in design and very Seiko, with their hands and hour marker shape as well as the case lines. But still, each one is pretty unique in delivering that Seiko style. We'll first take a look at the Suwa-made Selfdater. This model is the origin of the first Automatic Grand Seiko, as I mentioned, but not by design, but rather the movement, as it's powered by the caliber 394 that will later be renamed to 6205. This line of calibers will eventually evolve and find its way into the beautiful 62GS, proving the quality and higher-end nature of this movement. It beats at 18,000 bph, which is pretty slow by today's standards, but was the norm back in the 60s. It also features a quick set date, which was considered advanced for the time. The watch itself is stunning, with a simple dial that has a faint vertical pattern, almost like a linen dial, but more delicate. The markers and hands are simple and resemble the first Grand Seiko model that came out in the 1960s as well. In fact, the whole watch looks like that Grand Seiko, with the only difference being the less intricate hour marker design and slightly wider lugs. Other than the simple dial with the crosshair across that gives it some flair, the size is another thing that makes this watch timeless in my opinion, as it wears surprisingly large despite being almost 60 years old. With a diameter of 36.5 millimeters and a lug-to-lug of 42.5, you would expect it to wear smaller. But thanks to the all-dial design and a very thin bezel, it does have a nice presence on the wrist, while still keeping that vintage charm. The Sportsmatic, on the other hand, looks a bit more modern. With the sloped chapter ring and faceted rather than domed crystal, it looks more like a watch from the 1970s. This sloping chapter ring, combined with a thicker bezel, results in a smaller dial, which makes this wear smaller than the Selfdater despite being the same in size on paper. The crystal on this also features a cyclops, something rarely seen on Seiko watches, and although I usually don't like them, on this it adds to the cool factor of the watch. Under the crystal is a dial that features almost identical markers and hands as the Selfdater, with the differences being a sunburst finish and the already mentioned sloped chapter ring. This watch is powered by the caliber 820 that will later be renamed 7625, and it is the product of Daini Factory. It also beats at 18,000 bph and comes with a quick set date. Since both of these watches are automatic, and since automatics were not that common in the 60s, Seiko tucked away the crowns on both to accentuate the fact you didn't have to wind these every day to keep them going. I like that a lot, as it makes the cases look a lot cleaner and more symmetrical in design. Now, these are some of the nicest looking vintage Seikos that carry a lot of the Seiko DNA we'll find later in King and Grand Seikos. But unlike those, these can still be had for pretty low prices. So if you're on the hunt for a vintage Seiko, but can't afford or don't want to spend too much money on a King or Grand Seiko, you should definitely check one of these out. Even if, like me, you already own a vintage King or Grand Seiko, I feel one of these would be a great addition to the collection, as a watch you wouldn't be afraid to wear every day, as opposed to their more valuable brothers. Well, that completes this week's video, so thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed and found it useful. If you did, please like and subscribe, and until the next video, bye.